How y'all doing? Thank y'all very much for joining me today. Um, I was going to take a little bit of time before I actually started to comment on the state of the country as it stands right now. But I think that it is put upon me to kind of give a compilation of everything that I began to see, especially in this news cycle regarding the impeachment of Donald Trump and the bigger picture that everybody seems to be missing. By the way, like, follow, and share this message. This is Theo E.J. Wilson. Make sure that y'all subscribe at the bottom of this channel. But listen, I'm going to get right into it. All y'all who's joining me later, just make sure that y'all rewind and click to the beginning of this video. But I said this before. I think it's worth repeating the quote from Thomas Jefferson when he said, "I tremble for this country when I remember that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." And what Thomas Jefferson was talking about was there's certain inevitable causes that would make sure that in his time, slavery was going to be something that would end. And he said this in the context of America or any nation rises and falls on its integrity to its industriousness. And moreover, there's its integrity to what it says that its principles actually are and how well it walks those out in the real world. We are looking at what can only be described as the fall of a very great empire. Vladimir Putin, what's up, JV? Vladimir Putin said recently in an interview that America is an empire that is falling the same way that all other empires have ever fallen. And that is a crumbling from within. We, I think, are living in the country, and it's hard for us to see the big picture because we're in it. We can't see the forest for the trees. So here's a few trees that I want to lay out when it comes to just how far we've gone. Number one, the concept of democratic backsliding. A lot of people are starting to look up what this concept means. Democratic backsliding means that when you have a set up democracy, it's not a permanent thing. It is a very motherfucking fragile situation, and it can take a back step if things are not done properly. We've seen this in other foreign countries, especially in Latin America, when they've had duly elected people that have then come into office and began to behave like dictators. You got these people defying subpoenas left and right. That's a major thing. The reason why this is a major thing is because the legal consequences are only things that are keeping this thing in balance. The checks and balances that were set up by the founding fathers, regardless if you like them motherfuckers or not, the fact is that they were set up for a reason. And it could be summed up with this big Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. They were all too well acquainted with what abuse of power looked like. They set it up for a reason. The fact that folks are defying subpoenas is a major thing because it exposes something. All of this shit is pageantry. All of this shit that we look at as law and hardcore structures of democracy are really just ideas. And that they're only as strong as the people that are acting in them. If the people acting within these structures don't have integrity, neither does the goddamn system, right? You got a situation where you got Mayor Giuliani acting as a shadow foreign policy advisor for this country, basically a de facto Secretary of State, implementing things that are completely illegal according to our laws. One of the things that I learned early on in my participation in voting and my participation in democracy is that you only get as much democracy as power will allow. I'll say it again. You only get as much democracy as power will allow. Meaning, if there are some coercive and corruptive forces that are behind the supposed democracy, they're the thing that's ultimately going to have its way, unless there's enough people with enough power, enough integrity, enough check on these bad actors to make sure that the things that we look upon as democracy stay in place, period, point blank. You know what I'm saying? And I say this understanding that, like, as a Black man, I could be tempted to sit in my historical position as an oppressed minority, one of the most oppressed minorities in this country, and just kind of look back and be like, everyone, these motherfuckers, and get my popcorn and be like, wow, this is a crazy shit show, right? And try to look at it from a detached perspective. But the fact is, when shit falls, it falls on us first. When these structures collapse, it is the least among us who bear the brunt of it. The issue that I see with all of this going on is, number one, a nation divided against itself just cannot stand. When America falls, a lot of Black people are going to get hurt by this shit. We like to act like, ideologically we can sit back, but the fact is we depend on this gas. We shop at Walmart or whatever place that you decide to get your food. Like, we are like participating in the economic structure. Like we got American dollars in our bank account. So if America loses its position as the placeholder for the world currency and the world's reserve currency, the actual standard which all currencies are measured against, that's just going to affect you regardless, right? This is just something to put in context what's going on. You know what I'm saying? If you pay attention, what's really going on in the world, this shit is extremely transparent. Thank you very much, Michelle. It's facts. Look, here's the biggest danger of all of this, man. And that is that we are starting to see the expose of the fact that this shit isn't working the way that it was designed to work in how the economy is actually showing up. Something that y'all got to pay attention to, right? That's happening even as this impeachment and even as this corruption is being exposed, is what's going on with the homelessness situation. What's going on with the homeless situation, especially here, and if you live in a place like California, you will start to see that when the systems begin to fail, the real people in this country, that is the seed of revolt and revolution. California, for example, is home to 12% of America's total population. It's a big ass state. And it's home to 50% of our homeless population, our unhoused neighbors. Look at what this is saying to you, because when you look at these homeless encampments, that shit looks a lot like the Great Depression to me. It does. When you got folks that are not able to live on 40 hours a week of honest work, you're starting to see that there is a runaway economic system that's not being checked by the government that we are voting for. That's a major thing. Look at this shit, right? You see here in my hometown that the way that the governments are responding to these situations is through force. Like when you look at other countries, for example, we know that the best cure for homelessness is giving folks houses. And I know that we're so stuck on this idea that socialism is the enemy to America that we are not thinking about the fact that there are economic solutions in place to these very problems. Who are among those homeless people more than the veterans, right? A lot of Black people, but a lot of Black veterans as well. You're looking at a situation where you got very well-trained people who know what to do with a gun, who know what to do and how to behave in a firefight, that are looking like they got nothing to lose. That is a dangerous situation in this country. Just the fact that we got so many veterans, nobody's looking at this. Like the FBI and the CIA, they keep sending in spies to look at activists like me, right? People who are just rhetoricians who's trying to bring light to certain issues, but it's really the motherfuckers who's trained for a fight. It's the Spartacus principle. It's literally how Spartacus almost took down the Roman Empire, because he was a gladiator who was trained to know how to kill, and he used that shit against the state. That's what you're going to start seeing a lot of this homeless population going on, man. The economy is just not working for those of us who need it to work the most for us. And you got this crazy denial. This is so mind-boggling. When you look at how the Republicans specifically needed Donald Trump to basically confess to being a corrupt son of a bitch before an impeachment could actually start to get underway, means that the denial of what we were looking at, just as a motherfucker who didn't know the law, so of course he's not going to follow this shit, right? You're looking at a situation whereby we needed somebody to actually just tell on themselves before we had enough integrity to be like, okay, well, this just can't go any further. You see what I'm saying? We are living in different realities here, and a house divided against itself cannot stand. We can't agree on the facts of shit. We can't agree on common ass denominators that can be found in objective reality. That's dangerous. You know why? Because you have such disparate narratives being spun in the minds of the American people that they're willing to fight and go to war about that shit. You got Republicans talking about if Donald Trump doesn't win the election or if he gets impeached, they're willing to take to the street with their guns, knowing that far-right extremism is the number one dangerous terrorist threat in this country. And you got regular people armed and ready to go, ready to kill. There are too many guns and there are too many unstable, medicated motherfuckers in this country for us to have such disparate narratives about reality itself. Like when you get to the situation, like for example, you got folks who are being abandoned by the Republican Party in coal country, right? You got folks who are working in steel. I know folks who work in the automotive industry, whether it be scrapping or parts, who are suffering economically. Like when I tried to sell my old car, I just got a new car. When I tried to sell my old car, the dude who took my car was like, literally, I can't give you as much for this shit because the tariffs on steel that this asshole is making a thing in my life because he put tariffs on China, right? When you got people suffering to that level, and then when you got people who need these folks, they still won't abandon Trump because of whatever addictive emotions that they have attached to this dude. They're willing to fight over it. It is a dangerous cocktail of situations, right? And there's this thing that's going on that people aren't really realizing. When you look at the impeachment, when you look at all the governmental bureaucratic machinery that has been refocused on trying to uproot this corruption and trying to impeach this dude and do the Mueller investigation, all that shit, it's all because of the fact that we have suffered an attack from Russia that for real, is answerable only with war when you look at this from a geopolitical lens. We have been at war with Russia ever since they bombed ISIS in Syria back when Obama was still president, right? Vladimir Putin's a fucking genius. He is a genius. He's an evil genius, like make no mistake. But he knew that installing this asshole in the White House was going to create fault lines and fractures, not only within our culture, but within the government. That is like if you look at a well-oiled machine and you look at the master gear in that machine and you put one faulty gear in that machine, it cracks and breaks the entire machine apart. He knew that shit. He knew exactly what he was doing. When you look at how countries are divided, when you look at the CIA's tactics when they go in and cause civil unrest, when they cause the Arab Spring and shit like that, when you look at how they do it, and Roland Martin did a report on this, they go towards pre-existing fractured lines inside of that society where there's always been beef, or there's always strife, or there's always drama. They go and exacerbate that. And what was the biggest strife point in America? Race. Roland Martin did a really good report on this when he talked about how Black lives matter, and all of us who are very, very pro-Black, all of us who are very triggered by what's going on with police and stuff, we're targeted by Russian bots in order to exacerbate our anger. And what ended up happening was a lot of us were so angry, so exacerbated, we stayed home and away from the polls. And we were the votes that could have shifted this shit the other direction, even though Trump did lose by 3 million votes. Like, let's be clear about this shit. He didn't have no landslide, right? But even that was enough for us to actually lose. And there's an argument whether or not the Democrats are the right people for the job, long-term, whatever. But look at what happened there, right? That is an act of war. We've been at war with these motherfuckers. In fact, we're at war by proxy via the Kurds on the Syrian border with Turkey. We are at war with these motherfuckers right now. You see what I'm saying? Like World War III, low-key, is already in the works. It's already happening, and it's been happening since Obama was in the White House. You see what I mean? And they know strategically, if you could not defeat America with military force, you could definitely cause strife from within. And it's working like a motherfucker. We'll say, you're a very great speaker. Thank you for being inspirational, brother. I appreciate that, right? The whole world is breaking apart. A lot of that is happening right now, right? So we look at the fact, now let's do a recap so far. By the way, Theo Wilson, like, follow, share this video out, because this is major. Black folks will not be unaffected if America crumbles. You just got to know that shit and like move accordingly. This is not saying like everybody pick up your flags and go on the front lines for America. This is like understand what the fuck is going on here and how you're connected with it. It's not something we could just sit back and eat popcorn about, right? So we said Trump, Democratic backsliding. You got a nation divided on the facts, right? You got the failing economy showing up in the homelessness crisis, which is showing up in gentrification. Those of us who are living in lower income neighborhoods that are actually seeing the economic takeover from those who are in the gentry, i.e. the rich people, i.e. the 1%, or even the top 10%, right? You're looking at a fact that we are truly low-key at war with Russia. You got the Justice Department investigating itself, and what's being exposed with this Mark Zuckerberg shit, one of the most interesting things is that they've always been spying on us. People have always been saying this shit, but now it's time to acknowledge it. They've always been spying on us. When Mark Zuckerberg sat before the Congress a few days ago, it was just exposed that, like, yo, your private messengers, I don't care if you sending crazy messages, dick pics and coochie pics and all that shit, you are getting spied on. They're collecting all of this data in a gigantic database. There is no privacy on social media. And what Cambridge Analytica proved is that that information can be bought and used against you politically. Too many fracture lines, y'all. Too many places where integrity is lacking and too many bad actors seeping through the seams for this to be a sustainable thing. This is a for real, like red alert situation right now. You see what I'm saying? And what I said before is this, for those of you who are just joining me, there's too many drugs and guns. Too many drugs. And we were talking about psychotropic drugs. There was a study done on one of the things that mass shooters had in common. Despite the fact that the majority of them are white men, the majority of them are far right-leaning, but another thing that they have in common is the fact that there are psychotropic drugs that these guys were on, dating back all the way to Columbine. Like, you got all these guns and all these people that are literally not perceiving the world the right way because they're doped the fuck up off of prescription medication. Look at this, right? I used to work for a prescription drug company. It was called RX Pro Health. It was back in 2008. And my job was to staff pharmacists everywhere. And this is going to lead back to the fall of America and the crazy shit that's going on right now. But when you see it, these bottles, a lot of them say modus operandi of these psychotropic drug medications are unknown. We're lab rats. They really don't know how this stuff is working. My boy Leo Fry killed himself off of antidepressants. The shit was supposed to make him happier. It made him worse because of the fact that the MO was unknown and it distorts the way that you see the world, and it could throw your hormones off of whack if you get off the medication and your system tries to rebalance itself. Therefore, if you had violent tendencies already, and a lot of these people on these psychotropic drugs got violent tendencies, they are more likely to act on them, right? This is huge because, as you see, there's no way really to stop these mass shootings, and it's tearing at the fabric of the country, and it puts all of us in danger. I don't give a fuck how good you're living your life. Anybody, I know 3 people personally. I personally know 4 people who are actually survivors of mass shootings. I know 2 people who survived Columbine and 2 people that survived the Batman shootings, right? This is part of the cocktail of making America an explosive thing. And you add to the fact that China just debuted a weapon that is a supersonic ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile that's faster than all of our radar detectors. You got the world who's been taught by America that blunt force trauma is the only way to deal with us. So they was like, all right. And you got another X factor that's a huge thing. The fact that we're not educated enough to compete with these folks, right? You got, by the time the average Japanese or Swedish student hits their senior year in high school, they've had almost, or sometimes above, 1,000 hours more education than your average American student. Geopolitically, this is going to play out. America's really only on top because of our economic leverage and the fact that we can kick anybody's ass if they get out of line. That's not going to work forever, especially with these other nations gaining military leverage. This shit is real, man. Thomas Jefferson said, I tremble for this country when I remember that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. He knew that if the country didn't have good moral character in mass, that eventually those gaps in our moral character would show up in a very real dollars and cents way. And it's starting to show up right now. There was a poll done recently that asked Americans whether or not they thought that we were close to civil war. And 70% of Americans in this poll said, yes, we are close to civil war inside of this country. Now, the factors aforementioned, of course, are the things that are leading to that kind of civil distrust and civil unrest, but it's a real motherfucking thing. Kendrick, what's up, brother? Thank you very much for subscribing. Appreciate that. You see, this is one of the things, the powers, a true power. What's going on? I would love to be on any of y'all shows. If anybody wants to actually have me like as a part of their podcast, I would love to do that. But you got to look at this, man. The gaps in our moral character, the gaps in the ways in which that we are a community or not a community, is going to be the things that can be used by an outside enemy to fracture us from within. And it's so, civil activists such as America was built on in God and trust, and over the years, God was removed. There's some talk about that. There's an argument to say whether or not the founding fathers were Christian. There's an argument to say that whether or not the founding fathers really believed in democracy as we practice it today, as is evidenced by the fact that only propertied, wealthy white men were allowed to vote. You see what I'm saying? Somebody says something really, really deep to me about our democracy in this country. And they said that if Black people weren't allowed to vote, did you really have a democracy? If women weren't allowed to vote, if Native Americans were being genocided, if you had uh, policies that were just draconian as hell for most of the time in this country, did you really have a democracy? And the answer is no. So if you think the democracy that we participate in nowadays is 200 years old, it's not. It's really only 50 years old. This is still a fragile experiment. And Trump is like a stress tester on the systems of government. This is a stress test, right? Pretty soon, these people that are defying subpoenas are going to have to be arrested and brought in. Like there's going to have to be jail time faced by them. What the biggest X factor that keeps the Republicans on Trump's side is, and this is a real thing, they said they're not afraid of Donald Trump. They're afraid of his voter base. They're afraid of what they can do. They know that Donald Trump has stoked a kind of violence, and coercion is a currency. Coercion is a power. These Republican senators low key don't want to go back to their districts to some armed and angry Trump supporters ready to take their anger out on them. That's what's really going on, right? And you got to look at the fact that we, geopolitically speaking, are falling, are declining, and there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. I was told to look at something called the BRICS nations. If you don't look at the BRICS nations, then you really can't see what's going on. BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. I'll say this again: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS nations. These are nations that are forming a counter power block to traditional Western power. When you say the New World Order, people's like, you got to be aware of the New World Order, the Illuminati and shit like that. What you're really talking about is the alliance between Rome, London, and DC. Rome, London, and DC, right? And everybody in the European Union, right? That is one power block. Russia don't play along with them people. Y'all got to understand what Russia really is. Russia ain't like your regular white folks. Russia's like the strongest white folks in the world. Like, you know what I'm saying? They're different. Like, and you can see that even in athletics and boxing, like these are just some strong ass European people, right? But another thing about Russians is that they're cold and they never forgot when their czars were killed by Europe, right? What was it around the early 1900s? Like Russia had a royal family and everything. Like before Russia started experimenting with all this communist shit, they had a royal family. They had a long lineage of kings and queens that was actually decapitated by the European powers. And they never forgot that shit. They really haven't been cool with them ever since then, right? Ever since then, Russia's kind of been able to do its own thing. And it has suffered some crazy shit going on, but they're hard. They're hard and they're smart. The motherfuckers are smarter than us. Like you gotta know when somebody's smarter than you, so that you know that you like that you're outmatched, so that you can get equipped to deal with them. But they're smarter than we are. You see what I'm saying? Vladimir Putin looked at Donald Trump and he read that motherfucker. Textbook buffoon narcissist, right? All you got to do is pay this fool a little bit of compliment. All you got to do is stroke his ego a little bit and you got him, right? Never mind what leverage he's had for whatever happened when Donald Trump was in Russia for that Miss America or Miss Universe contest, whatever that was, where the PP tape supposedly happened, right? You know, when there was supposedly some urine and some prostitutes or something like that, right? Never mind that. Never mind the fact that Donald Trump's power block, low key, has always been Russians. He's had Russian dealings ever since, one of his old school is Cohen, since Roy Cohen, ever since Cohen was alive. Donald Trump has been in bed with the Russians. You know what I'm saying? There's been secret Russians in Trump Tower for the longest motherfucking time. Every president brings their cartel with them, right? So for the Bush, for example, his cartel was the oil boys. For Clinton, it was all the stuff that was going on with that Whitewater stuff. And for Barack Obama, his cartel was the banking cartel. Like he was the big new Brzezinski's boy. You know what I mean? So the international bankers was the folks who had Obama's back. That's how he got into office, stayed in office, and kept his black ass alive, right? But Trump's cartel was the Russians. He's always been in bed with these people. Problem with his cartel is they're not Americans, right? In fact, they're traditionally have been our enemies for the longest time. And so he tried to bring that cartel with him into power, like every other president has brought their cartel with them into power. And it's just been the thing that has not worked. When you look at the fact, when you look at the man hours, when you look at the legal minds, these are still the sharpest that America has produced that are working in the intelligence industry right now. The fact that they're looking inward instead of outward, the fact that these very intelligent, cutthroat people have to be focused on what's going on inside is Putin's doing. You know exactly what he was up to. That motherfucker has been known geopolitically as the global chess master for a long time, right? He says, what do I do with the enemy who's outgunned me, who's outmanned me? We're, several times their population. Our military spending, is like something of the effect of 5 to 20 times. It's like we outspend them militarily like a motherfucker, right? So what do? You cut off the head. And that's what he did. It's brutal, right? So how does this shit look for Black people? It looks like this. Number one, we're not necessarily survivalists like some of these crazy backwoods white folks are. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't have stockpiles of rations. We don't have stockpiles of water. We don't have freaking survival training. A lot of us don't know how to hunt. We don't know how to skin and gut a deer or even a rabbit for that matter. You see what I'm saying? A lot of us are not agriculturally minded. We are woefully dependent on the system as it stands. And you got to acknowledge that if you want to get free from that. You see what I'm saying? Like en masse. And this is exposed in every fucking natural disaster, whether it be Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Harvey, you goddamn name it, right? Natural disasters. And then we ain't even talked about the climate yet. Like we ain't even talked about what's going on with nature. We just talking about the human factors, right? But if you look at how linked we are, we are freaking, you know what I'm saying? Like an infant to the nipple. We are dependent on this shit right now en masse. There's a few of us who have some military training, but honestly, our vulnerability is exposed every time a Black person is killed by the cops. The fact that we as our own community do not have a justice mechanism built in to avenge our lives exposes just how woefully dependent we are on the system. You see what I'm saying? Most of us don't own, we rent. We don't have international assets. We don't have bank accounts and foreign money collecting interest in Sweden or Switzerland. We don't have any of that shit, right? En masse. There's always a few of us who know how to hunt, survive, and go into the wilderness and, have international connections. But without that, this shit means disaster for most of us if history is correct. All I'm doing is studying history. People think I'm so smart, you prophetic. No, I'm just a student of history. I know how this shit happens, right? This dude that I follow, you guys might want to look this cat up. His name's Chris Hedges, white guy, man. Freaking, but look, he ain't somebody you want to listen to when you're trying to go to bed at night. Motherfucker's difficult to hear, okay? But he wrote a book called America, the Farewell Tour. America, the Farewell Tour by Chris Hedges. And the book talks about how the moral decline of America is resulting in what's a lot of times called animus or anima. And it's a group malaise. It is a collective angst, depression, and illness that will grind these systems to a halt. All of them, because they're all based on people. See what I'm saying? Used to be good at, he said that's crazy because Blacks used to be good at working with nature due to our former agricultural knowledge after slavery. Future 5001, you're exactly right. Black people used to have the entire skill economy of the United States. Black people were feared because not only did we know how to work, but we could outwork anybody. That's what happens when your ass used to be a slave. When you look at the days of Booker T. Washington, before he helped found Tuskegee University and created the up from your bootstraps type ethic, the reason why that was able to catch on and the reason why it was so threatening for America is because Black folks were not only cotton pickers, we were blacksmiths, engineers, we were railroad workers. We knew how to sew, we knew how to grow, we knew how to farm and freaking organize. We knew how to do all of that shit because we had to. When we stopped being rural and became mainly urban dwellers, we lost that skill economy and made us just as dependent upon the system as everybody else, yo. That's fact. Wow, it's really frustrating with Republicans in office. America doesn't feel like home. Many are leaving the US. I myself now live in Asia, and it's great to live freely. Dang, Melly Smith. Well, shout out to you from Asia. Thank you very much. one of the things that African Americans can start doing is start seeing themselves as an international people. And people always like, well, I ain't leaving America, blah, blah, blah. Look, motherfucker, start seeing yourselves as an international people. We ain't even from here. We African people, first and foremost, right? When you look at how I've got a few friends that are expats. I got one sister friend of mine who lives in Vietnam. I got another group of friends who live in La Manzanilla, Mexico. I got some other folks who actually repatriated to Ghana. And when you look at the price of living, one of the best things that we have going for us is that the lands of opportunity are actually the poorest countries right now, if you're a Black American. Why? Because as long as America still has some dominance, that dollar goes 5 to 20 times as far as in another country. You can simply invest there and grow that shit 10 times as fast. Akon talked about this when he spoke before the African Union. I believe that was the time he spoke before the African Union. But Akon talked about this. The land of opportunity actually is Africa. Like, that's where it is. You see what I'm saying? Why? Because you're getting in on what's known as the ground floor. The ground floor. America is kind of the land of opportunity if you've got capital to invest here. And I'm talking about capital that you can lose and get some more capital to try again. If you can figure it out here in America, our wealth, you can build it. We are the richest Blacks on the entire planet. That is true, right? But it's worth even more money if you can make that shit grow for you internationally. If you can't do that shit, then what happens is that you get wealth here, and when things change in America, you lose wealth here. This is what it is. We are dependent upon this being the world's reserve currency, and we're dependent upon these stock markets. You know what I'm saying? One thing, that I do appreciate about Dr. Boyce Watkins is that he keeps you abreast of the economy. He keeps you in line with the stock market. He always sends out emails and lets you know exactly what good investment opportunities might be for those of us who are trying to participate in capitalism, at least to get our own selves up, right? Petrodollar. That's a major thing. Thank you very much. True power is mine. Petrodollar. Let's talk about that petrodollar. It began and stated after not Lincoln, way after that. Nixon. I believe it was Nixon that finally killed the gold standard. And he pulled some kind of amazing trick where he had all of the Western nations invest in this one thing, and then he cut off. I forgot how it works, so I'm ugly paraphrasing this. But it was under Nixon that the petrodollar became a thing, meaning a lot of people think that America's wealth is only based on faith, right? Ever since we got off the gold standard. It's not quite true. Our natural resource is oil. That's why America goes to war and kills for oil, because we know how valuable that shit is. You see what I'm saying? But we're not going to be able to do that but for so long, especially with the loose cannon at the helm of this country. I sometimes think about all the presidents before Donald Trump as dominoes being set up for the one faulty domino to make it all fall. Look at this. This is crazy, right? So America gets all this military supremacy. We get the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, second only to Russia. We get all of the abilities that we have to spy on folks. And we've got CIA killing motherfuckers all over the fucking planet. But all you need is one dumbass to knock this whole string of dominoes over. And we got him. When you look at the impulsive decision that Donald Trump made to pull out of Syria, emboldening the Kurds, and yes, of course, in some kind of way, I suppose that we just killed al-Baghdadi. So I guess that's supposed to be some kind of major victory. Motherfuckers wouldn't talk about al-Baghdadi. I guess they were in the intelligence community. We weren't looking like, hey, when we gonna get al-Baghdadi? Nobody was talking about that shit like they were for Bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. You see what I'm saying? So, but that's not really a victory. That's not really a victory for us. What a victory would be is if we figured out how to take care of this damn student loan debt. What a victory would be is if we figured out how to rebuild the middle class. Call it socialism, whatever. That shit don't scare me no more. What happens is that you got to have a way that sets the default of the country for the empowerment of the middle class and those in the middle. The default of the economy right now is that shit just happens to keep going to the top 1%. We got to change the default settings. The default settings of the economy have to be so that people at the bottom and people in the middle are the ones who are getting enriched, not the people at the top who don't fucking need it. That's where the default is set right now. However you want to do that, whatever policies you want to call it, the default has to change. Because if you have that keeping on happening, you got way too many crazy people here with way too many guns, who's getting off their meds because they can't afford them, and especially a lot of them being veterans who know what the fuck they doing. It's different. Me trying to train to be a soldier, a super soldier and shit, that would take too much of my time. I got other things. I'm an artist. I sing and play the piano and shit like that. Like, you know what I'm saying? I have to assess. Like my ideas are powerful, but physically, I'm not really the most threatening motherfucker. The most threatening people are the ones who know what the hell they're doing when you put a freaking AR-15 in their hand. If you get a group of those guys who freaking know how to do some suppression fire and know how to freaking tactically move in an urban environment and shut down the block, that's the real threat to democracy. Because those people are the ones who are going to be the ones who can stop the defensive and immunity. So I call like the defense department, like the immune system of the country. Those people are the ones who are going to be able to shut down the coercive defense mechanisms. Those are the ones y'all need to be looking at. You see what I'm saying? Because until we get this shit correct, it's going to keep on falling down. Impeachment will not be the solution to the problem because we've already set the bar too low for presidents to come. That's part of the problem with Nancy Pelosi's supposedly master strategy of waiting until the right moment until she could finally pull the trigger on impeaching Donald Trump. He got away with too much shit as it was. He got away with too much shit. The dude had to admit and then ask for more foreign interference before people are like, okay, we got to impeach this nigga now. Duh, right? Too much stuff happened. So basically, before that, this is what he got away with. He was able to freaking say, Russia, if you're listening, he was able to get away with that. He was able to get away with using campaign finances in order to pay out Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. He was able to get away with freaking, God damn, it's like so much shit. He's done so much stupid shit, like I can't even think about it right now. You see what I'm saying? Like the freaking Trump Tower meeting, he was able to get away with that. His collusion is like no collusion. He got 10, look, in the Mueller report alone, you got 10 plus instances of obstruction of justice. He was able to get away with that. Like this shit's already too far gone. The next president can basically get away with that entire checklist, except for all he has to do is just not openly call for foreign interference on the middle of it, and then have an asshole like Mick Mulvaney say, oh yeah, this is what we did, get over it. You see what I'm saying? That's all they have to do. Everything up to that checklist. Because our integrity is not where it needs to be. We're not truthful about who we are. We're not truthful about what is at stake for our systems, and we're not truthful about our ability to enforce the laws that we say that we believe in. And if that's not in place, this shit may have already backslidden too far. Wouldn't it be safer in a republic, democracies, two racist people, one black man voting who's got to, I'm sorry, I can't read that true power is mine. It's a little choppy. See what I'm saying? But the bottom line is that a house divided cannot stand. And we may be divided past the point of return. That's what's going on. There's too many people who believe too much different shit. When you look at Trump supporters and the way that they have attached themselves to Donald Trump and to his narrative and the way that they're not looking at evidence, like if you turn to Fox, it's like turning to a whole different world. You know what I'm saying? Than it is if you are in the left or vice versa. Like if you always watch Fox and then you turn to something like MSNBC or CNN, then it's like, okay, this is a whole different world, a whole different narrative. It's too many people that believe shit in too far apart away paradigms. Our paradigms are too far apart to the point that when they clash, it looks like fighting words. Move accordingly. Understand what we're looking at and understand that this shit cannot last. Figure out a way to become an international person. Something like I'm almost like low key ringing the bell, like get out, like low key, like get the fuck out of here. You know what I'm saying? Do what you can, you know, and we'll see what this next election cycle, what can happen. I used to be a person that didn't think that voting mattered. You know, like the first election I ever voted in was Florida 2000. So I just straight up watch people get turned away from the polls. I watch votes get stolen, ballot boxes not being counted in like Broward and Dade counties and stuff like that. I saw that my first election. I lived in Florida. You know what I'm saying? I used to believe that voting didn't matter. I used to believe that there was not too much of a difference between the parties. I will say that on a corporate level, you're right if you say there's not a big difference between the parties. But when it comes to policy, it is a big difference in terms of like the lasting effects of this. Like had Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton been president, you're just not going to have all these conservative judges that got appointed, making laws for the next decades. You know what I'm saying? Like setting policy for decades. That shit matters, especially if you're somebody who's part of a community that has been victimized by the criminal justice system. That shit matters. See what I'm saying? Like I used to believe voting didn't matter. It matters. It fucking matters. You got to stay involved. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm about to say. Look at that. I will leave you with read the quote and the whole treatise that Thomas Jefferson wrote when he said, "I tremble for this country when I remember that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." It was an entire dictum about what happens when the integrity of the country is not right and how the consequences for that lack of integrity are eventual and inevitable. Read that. It's a real stuff. It's written in that old English speak, but it's worth sifting through. In the meantime, I'm Theo E.J. Wilson. Like, follow, definitely share, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. Holla back. Spread this message out there if y'all agree. Peace.